Yes, Guyana to the world.
Globuspan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globuspan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
Globuspan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globuspan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavor, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high in unity.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Globuspan, this edition of our Globuspan program on this Wednesday. Welcome to you wherever you are. And we have some familiar faces. We have Mr. Timothy Jonas, Senior Counsel, resident here in Guyana, Dr. Terence Blackman, Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in New York, and myself, G.H.K. Lal, who I think some of you, if not quite a few of you, know, at least from this program. We are thankful to Mr. Nohar Singh and his group for making this program possible, and we are glad for the opportunity to share with you about things that are happening in Guyana. We have 3 issues that we're going to talk about tonight. And to help us along is Mr. Devin Bissoon, who, as usual, does a wonderful job piloting this program. We start with all eyes on Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, currently here in Guyana, has received a warm, if not rapturous, welcome, and lots of expectations here. In terms of his visit, it's the first one in over a half a century by an Indian Prime Minister. And I would have thought that because of the linkage between Guyana and India, that we would have more of these high-profile visits. We would have had the External Affairs Minister, perhaps the Defense Minister, the Technology Minister, Agriculture Minister coming here. But here we have Prime Minister Modi, and there are lots of expectations. I'll start with you, Dr. Blackman, and one of the things we agreed with folks who are listening is that we will be a bit informal tonight and we'll address each other by first name. So Terence, why don't you take this away and tell us how do you see this visit here from the leader of a country that was one time ostracized from the United States because of its close relationship with the Soviet bloc, and then non-alignment, and now it's got this BRICS set up and looking to expand its footprint in this region. Here is Mr. Modi, PM Modi in Guyana. What are your thoughts? What are your expectations?
Well, thank you, GFK. Good night, Timothy. Good night to viewers. So let me start with a somewhat personal thought. So last night I looked at someone shared with me the feed of the arrival of Prime Minister Modi in Guyana, and as I watched, I felt a certain sense of pride, and I'll say why. So first a personal note, and then a larger, more commentary related note. So I visited India in the year 2000. So my thesis advisor was an Indian national named Ravi Kulkarni. And so Ravi took me to India in the summer of 2000 to a place called the Harish Chandra Research Institute in Allahabad in India. And I spent almost 2 or 3 months there in India at the Institute. And so I got a very, very good sense of India as a country. I mean, you know, we would spend a week at the Institute, and then on the weekends we would drive to the various places there, Varanasi. You know, we drove to Madhya Pradesh. I mean, I have, you know, I traveled, I've probably gone to more places in India than many people who actually live in India. Right? So what I came away from then was a really, really deep appreciation for what was happening in India at 2000 in terms of its science and technology development, in terms of just the general culture at that moment, in terms of its embrace of, you know, the digital world, the 21st century world. I mean, we take these long drives out into rural parts of India, and we get to nowhere name, nowhere place, and there'd be two things: there'd be Coca-Cola and internet. And you know, at the Institute, you know, there were young men and women being hired on the phone. You know, if you someone here in you know this New York City well, you know, the back offices for all of these Wall Street industries, you know, in Jersey City and other places. I mean, the Indian technological talent is quite evident in this. So I have long been a fan of the way in which, and so one of the things that I saw there was the way in which the Indian diaspora, the structured way in which India was allowing its diaspora to participate in its development. And I have long been a fan of India. There are other things which I can say. One other thing I want to say on a purely personal note was that my hosts in India were often, so I'm coming to India from the graduate school in the City University of New York, so they don't have a sense of, you know, they view me solely as an American. And so they would often come to me and say, you know, why do you feel so familiar here? And one of the things I realized then was that, you know, if you grew up in Guyana, regardless of where you are, there's a certain Indian infused in you. And I try. No, it's the reality. I mean, it's yes. The words. You know, things like we would say paisa and so on. These are still current words. You know, and so I've long had a very strong sense that Guyana should emulate India in some ways. It shouldn't take everything, and perhaps we will talk about some of those things that it shouldn't take as we go forward. So I see Prime Minister Modi's visit really as a significant milestone. It's I think a great opportunity for Guyana to, you know, really up the diplomatic relation between the two nations. And you know, I think it underscores kind of, you know, deepening ties and a kind of mutual commitment to a shared future, which I think will have its own problems, and I hope we can talk about that. But certainly, I think it's entirely appropriate for Modi to visit. I think Guyana should welcome Modi's visit. I know that many of the things that talked about hydrocarbons and, you know, energy and so on, but there are lots of good reasons, and I hope we can explore them, why I think Guyana should be deepening its relationship with a country like India. India is not. I mean, I think so. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll pause for Timothy to say. But I think having visited India, having spent not just 2 or 3 weeks, but having spent 2 months, you have a different sense of what the country is, what its strengths are, what its aspirations are, what its competencies are, and also I think from the Guyanese perspective what its weaknesses are. So I think all in all, it's a good thing. I'll say one sort of discordant note, right? And I'll just say this as a way to set up some things that maybe will come later. So what I did was I shared the stream to my, private Facebook page, and I was unpleasantly surprised that very few people noted it, and it struck me that this polarization is evident in something that I think we ought to be mindful of, and we ought to find some language for discussion. But I want to say, on balance, this is a very, very, very good thing for Guyana. India is a very good partner for Guyana on a whole host of fronts, but we have to be mindful of the deepening ties with India can create some internal tensions that will challenge us going forward. So I'll pause there and listen to Timothy, since he is in Guyana and to a better position perhaps to say how this is being felt.
Good. Thank you, Terence. Timothy, as we come to you, we want to hear about your expectations on this visit. Bearing in mind, we have the Chinese presence here. We have the tensions between India and China that is never really too deep below the surface. And then against that, we have the strength of India, known strength. Terence alluded to in fields like IT and agriculture. And they were asking about how can we participate in your oil lift that just came out a couple of minutes ago. And what can you share with our listeners, our viewers, about where you stand on this?
Well, first of all, I couldn't have said it better than Terence said it. I agree with everything he said. And it's funny, so much of what he said resonated with me. You see, I also been lucky enough to go to India, and I've walked through Delhi. Didn't get to travel as much as you did. But something that was immediately evident to me was that I felt right at home, and yet I was an oddity, so it wasn't reciprocated. Mm-hmm. And I must say that the people that I went with, they were taken aback at that almost insular aspect of the society. The society is very law-abiding. It is very polite. They're not like Guyanese. They're not brash and aggressive. They're quite retiring people. At least that was my experience of them. And what Terence says about what India has, I couldn't agree more. Their Institute of Technology, their education level, the quality of their professionals is something that I think we can learn from and benefit from. And the fact is, one of the interesting things about market forces is that we are already seeing it. I don't know if you've been in a hospital recently, GHK. I hope you don't find yourself in a hospital for the next 50 years. But if you do, you will find that there's a surprising number of nurses who are Indian nationals, and doctors who are Indian nationals are also opening the door to come down here. And it's a curious development that we've had, that in terms of level of salary, we are actually an attractive option for the Indian nationals. And we are seeing some of them come in. I have seen some Indian nationals come into my office investing in property here, starting businesses as a step off, as a launch off from starting out in a hospital. Others see us as a stepping stone to reach to the States. But we are already seeing that professionals from that country are coming. That interest is there. And the connection is very interesting. Now, I think that's a good thing. I would like to see it continue. I think insofar as Prime Minister Modi is here, it is a reflection of our increased stature financially on the world stage. of course, you do have the coincidence of the CARICOM presence here, but I don't think that detracts from the reality that more and more, as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, we are attracting that kind of attention. And I think only good can come of it. I am curious to see the dynamics. I haven't been able to watch much of the video, but one thing that, you know, we've seen it on the world stage. We've seen a swing from the left, a swing from the liberal approach, and the success of, for want of a better expression, strongmen in politics. So we've just seen a return of Donald Trump, for example. And Prime Minister Modi, in his part of the world, is seen in that light. He took a pro-Hindu approach in his country, well, was perceived to have, and emerged as someone seen as a strong leader and won an election by quite a margin by taking that kind of approach. I think it's a reflection of the mores of the view in the world, worldwide almost, that allows political leaders in democracies to preach a message that resonates directly with the emotive views of the population. So that Donald Trump, for example, was able to speak to the Bible Belt and talk about abortion, and was able to speak to the working class and talk about no more immigration to compete for your jobs, and was able to speak to the business class and talk about tax structures. So it resonated with each group emotively, and I think Prime Minister Modi also cleverly did that in his own campaign. I think that some of our local politicians barely aspire to that kind of skill. We haven't seen it yet, but I would like to see the interactions between Prime Minister Modi and our local politicians.
Yeah, I would add something from a distance. This Modi being the leader of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and that so that's what I meant, that there's some potential tensions that sit in that relationship. It is perceived as a kind of right-wing nationalist party that does emphasize this Hindutva, I sort of promoting Indian culture and identity rooted in sort of Hindu traditions, and then attend sort of like the a strong economic push, and the national security push, right? So that was one of the elements that I was referring to in my initial remarks, saying, we want to embrace India, but there are some elements of this that I think we have to be mindful of how that embrace should play out. One surprising thing, and I'll say this at the beginning. So when I looked at the video feed from Modi emerging from the plane last night and being greeted by President Ali, and I thought it would have sent a really, I mean, certainly the Prime Minister Mark Phillips was there, but it probably the leader of the opposition, I think, should also have been a part of that delegation welcoming Prime Minister Modi to Guyana, because of precisely that. I think that we can lose the advantage. I mean, historically, we're tied to India. We are part of an Indian diaspora, but we understand that within Guyana there are those Indo-Afro tensions, and I think that an opportunity was missed right there at the airport to have an inclusive, welcoming party. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I just mean that as there was an opportunity there to present a particular face which could mitigate against some of these issues. Precisely this sense that for some people globally, Modi is perceived as someone who has come to power, promoting a kind of a culture and identity rooted in Hindu traditions, and so it's something that could potentially be a tension in Guyana. So just to note that.
Thank you both gentlemen. Unlike you, although I went as far as Tokyo and was resident there for several months, I regret that the business travels didn't take me a little further east. I think that because of India looking to expand its global footprint, and particularly in this region, it has done so in some other countries, we stand to benefit from the presence of PM Modi. And I agree with you, Terence. We miss these opportunities, and we don't have many of them to show that we really can put aside those things that distress us, that divide us, and that continue to devastate us. And so with the historical linkage of Guyana and India, and you two gentlemen spoke highly of the diaspora and of your own experiences, there comes that time when we have to show the world, the world that we can rise above our differences. And I don't know how many more of these opportunities we are going to miss or we're going to let go by. Having said that, I am expecting that when the flurry of agreements are signed and announced within the next 24 hours or so, that there is going to be some advantage taken out, some benefit to this country. Of course, it's going to have to be mutual. The Indians have been gently turned away, I don't want to say rebuffed, with the marketing, selling of our oil lifts. And Exxon apparently has to have some say in that also, with the very large container ships and so on. But interestingly, the last thing that came on before I joined this program, before we started this program out of Demerara Waves, was that Modi again advanced to the entire region. Look, we can help you to combat crime. We can help you with transportation, with maritime endeavors, drug trafficking, piracy, and so on and so forth. And then there was something that I don't know much about, sargassum. I think it's seaweeds and how it interferes with the fishing industry. And look, I mean, India is sure to have tremendous experiences in these areas, and they're putting it at our disposal. Of course, there's got to be some quid pro quo. And I think that the priority of the Indians are in Guyana, but as I said here earlier, we are the people who are we've got the economic potential that is slowly becoming a reality. So it's not potential we're talking about. Lots of things are happening here. To the point raised earlier by you, Timothy, the last time, thank God, that I had to deal with a hospital was pre-COVID. And yes, Indian professionals are very much here. My previous wife, now deceased, was a nurse. And we had first-hand experiences, and you can talk about that, Terence, about the number of medical professionals in the medical field in the States, and not just in the big areas, metropolitan areas, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, in the other states, including in the Deep South. In addition to that, whilst on Wall Street, the Indian technology people, the IT people, the back office people, I mean, they were there in their numbers, and I think that has a lot of meaning for us, and we need to see how there can be that connectivity, that where we both benefit from this. Now, I want to shift this thing here. We don't want to make PM Modi's visit this, but I want to shift to something here that has been referenced. Strong man. I think it was ECLAC that did a survey, and where the respondents said a while back that a strong leader, correct me if I'm wrong here, gents, a strong leader is preferred so as to cut through the disorder and to get things done. We are prepared to surrender some, some ground so as to get that. Modi has shown that. I think Americans are expecting that from Donald J. Trump. But at what price for Mr. Modi in India, bearing in mind we have a reasonably a reasonable Muslim population in this country. We've got to go there, gentlemen. 200 million Muslims in India, and they have essentially been relegated to a place that is not of the best in terms of citizenship. And we have this gentleman here, and he's being garlanded and greeted. I think good things. What are your thoughts here? Timothy, you first.
Well, I found it interesting that Terence raised the question of the leader of the opposition being present in the context of exactly that to show that we can be inclusive and overcome these things. First of all, I don't think we can be inclusive. I don't think either of the two big parties is there. So if I think something is beyond hope, I'm not going to try to, beat it. So I do think, though, that if you look at the visuals of what was taking place on the tarmac when Prime Minister Modi disembarked from the plane, those pictures there, probably deliberately so, but the fact is, even if it wasn't planned, I think almost the same end result would be achieved. Show our diversity and show the interaction of our citizens, our diverse citizens, without regard to that diversity, everyone being equal. He couldn't have missed that. He could not have missed that because it is in such stark difference from the experience that I perceive is his in India. Now, that includes what you're talking about, the religious interactions. We have a Muslim president and I don't know if he's practicing, but a vice president of Hindu extraction. And all's well, no problem. That has to resonate with anybody that looks at it and draws a comparison. And I've said often, and I'll say it again, that we are an example to the rest of the world where that's concerned. So whether we want to say, well, that diversity we saw there is partially contrived or not, I don't think that matters. We are an example to the rest of the world. So there's no doubt there is something that Prime Minister Modi and India can learn from us. Now, the thing about the strongman philosophy, the strongman theory, is that, again, democracies in small countries like us, let alone in large countries with 2 billion people with over 1 billion people, that you will never come face to face with this so-called strongman. You will only be able to see him and perceive him through media in fora that are orchestrated by him and by his advertisers. So you never get a true sense of who this so-called strongman is. And what happens is that democracy becomes advertising. The person who advertises the most cleverly projects an image of himself that becomes appealing, and he wins. Donald Trump did it, which is why I gave the examples I gave. In the Bible Belt, he talks about abortion. In the business community, he talks about taxes. And in the working class community, he talks about cutting immigration. Now, those resonate emotively at an emotional level with each of those 3 classes and makes him sound strong. At the end of the day, it is how he projected and how his advertising team advertised him. I think that we got to recognize that that is a failing in democracy. I don't know if there's a solution to it, and I will say that as flawed as it is, democracy is the best system I can conceive. But I don't buy into the strongman reality. I do buy into the advertising. I think it's advertising.
Your thoughts, Terence?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Look, Modi's so I think because of my previous association with India, and I should say, I've had, it's been the fortune of my life that I've had a number of mentors who were from India. So, for example, the chair of the math department before I became the chair was another Indian national named Umesh Nagarkati, who has also been someone who has supported my career over many years. So I've followed India in a much more in a closer way than most people might imagine. And so, yes, there have been a number of challenges and criticisms of Modi. His leadership has been praised. Make no mistake about this, and he has done a number of wonderful things, which one can list. But certainly, many critics have argued that this emphasis on nationalism and cultural identity has certainly deepened, and there have been a number of incidents where Muslims in India have felt under siege, and some have lost their. I mean, I think one of the early kind of Modi coming to power was part of a situation where a number of Muslims in India, there was a riot of some sort where a number of Muslims lost their life in some region of India. The details I will skip. So there is this criticism of Modi in that context, and certainly I think even as a strongman, despite the reforms that he's put in place, questions like income inequality. And I wanted to say that was one of the other things that I wanted to say, that, as a Guyanese looking at the Indian society from the outside, the sort of level of comfort with extreme degrees of inequality is something that I don't think that we want to import from India. It's not been, feature of our Guyanese life to really tolerate sort of really wide and stark inequalities. These exist in India. So again, it's a huge country, and many people live well, but then there are also really people who live in extreme poverty. And despite these reforms that Modi has put in place, and he has done well in terms of moving the needle on poverty, these issues still remain significant challenges. And there has been, sort of global organizations have looked at, like there have been some policies around kind of citizenship amendment and handling of religious tension. So yes, that's there. But I say all that to say that I was very observant of the embrace between Modi and President Ali and the tarmac, and it was it was an extremely warm embrace. And so it could be as Timothy has noted, it could be politics, it could be, but it was a warm embrace. And I for one felt, again, I'm far away, and I for one felt, I think, I felt that was a sign of someone who was here, was glad to be here. There could be any number of reasons why, but certainly the optics for me, someone looking at it on a live stream, knowing something about about India and the politics of India and the politics of the BJP and some of the challenges that are there in the society. I certainly felt that, as a Guyanese, I felt that was a good start to whatever conversation they were going to have later.
Good.
So,
thank you. Mr. Modi, he comes with his expectations and we have ours too. I think there should be some sharing. Will be coming forth later. We hope that he has a successful visit and that we reap some rewards from that. I noticed you said about the greeting President Ali gave to the Prime Minister. And our president is noted for his exuberance in terms of his greetings. And last Tuesday, we're going to ask Mr. Bissoon, our technical expert here, to play a tape for us in a moment, a very brief tape. There was a meeting just before the sun rose that the president had called involving senior public servants, permanent secretaries, engineers. We had we had contractors, and I'm missing somebody, ministers. And there were ministers that were all brought before him. And the issue was about contract delays, tardy contracts, delays in concluding these things. Mr. Bissoon, could you roll that? And the president was very exuberant there too. Mr.
You're
Bissoon,
paid by the state to represent our interests. You came understanding that the president has a meeting this morning. I called this meeting at 5:30, not because I don't have anything to do. It's because of the concern that I have for these projects that are more than 4 months behind schedule. You came, what time did you come to the meeting? You're the consultant. You're supposed to be here before the contractor. And if you had any courtesies or even any respect for your own capability, the first thing you'd have done was to check if your contractors are here. This is what is happening. The passing of blame. You're the lead engineer. All your engineers are under you. You're the head of the projects department. And that is what collapses the system. No one taking responsibility. It's passing the buck. That is why, as president, I have to meet with these contractors now. Small projects. I have a million things to do because of the blame game, the passing of the buck. That is why I asked, the first question I asked, whether the project engineers are here. You hear the excuse now? Not me as the lead engineer. I give it a task to a project engineer. And did he report to you?
Yes, we spoke last night and we spoke several things on the project updates.
No. What did he inform the contractor to be here?
Your Excellency, that was not related to me.
So imagine your single instruction was to get the contractors here. You spoke to him on several matters last night. And you didn't ask, this is a man under your supervision. This is what you all are accepting in this ministry. You didn't ask this person under you whether the man was invited to the meeting. Because all of the projects here that are listed that are not completed before the end of the year will be terminated. So you have to determine how you develop a climate of confidence and a climate of success in your businesses and your organization. And you have to establish deadlines. It is not only the duty of the project engineers and the ministry to manage your deadlines. You also have to manage your deadlines with your staff.
impressive or illusory? Time management. I'll tell you a little story. You guys told me stories about India. As I got very senior on Wall Street, I said, listen, these meetings here, we are meeting about meetings. Here's the story. We got two things. You don't come here the chair of the meeting has to be there before the meeting starts. That's basic. Anybody who comes after, the door is locked. And then to cut down on long meetings, no chairs. I kind of like that one. No chairs. When people sit down, they talk forever, and you get nothing out of them. And then the last one I liked, just as much, you had it out in the open where all the others are. I think that came out from Welch at General Electric. So when you have all these eyes on you in the middle, then you're going to have answers ready. I think it was disrespectful that some people were not there when the president called that meeting. But we're talking about delays in contracts. We're talking about something that has been a bugbear on the different governments. Infrastructure, $558 billion of our national record budget. And interestingly, the vice president, the honorable vice president, Dr. Bharat Jagdeo, said, well, 5%, they got some problems with. 5%, gentlemen, and you're the mathematician here, Terence, that's $27 billion. That's 27 billion taxpayers' dollars here, and I think there's a problem with that. But that aside, we hear about time overruns. We hear about cost overruns. We hear about the weather. We hear about equipment. And I'm tired of hearing these things, and I'm not the president. I'm a nobody around here. Was the president serious? What should we expect for results? Terence.
So let me start again on a purely personal level. So I serve as the chair of the mathematics department. I've served as the dean of the School of Science. I've never had a meeting like that. So if I'm the dean, then there are 5 chairs who work with me. And so I have an ongoing meeting with chairs, and I expect that the chairs will have an ongoing meeting with their senior faculty. And so it just from a management standpoint, this would not be my preferred way of doing this. I think I've seen a similar kind of meeting in the past where the president has spoken to people who are ultimately under his control, but not his direct reports. And so it seems to me that as a strategy, the 5:30 meeting at State House to address projects being delayed by over 4 months needs to be a meeting between him and his direct reports, so that these people understand, so that he can speak to these people in private in a way that needs to be spoken, so that you can really generate the sort of there in this context. I think from a distance looking again, the challenge is it's a human capacity challenge. There's simply not enough capacity to do the job at the speed and the rate at which it's being done. And so you are going to have in affecting sort of complex projects like the ones that are in place, you're going to have those challenges where you have a huge set of people with diverse sets of responsibilities and skills. So that's to be expected. And I think I would say that speaks to the sort of systemic issues in these public sector processes. So really the lack of ongoing productive meetings between the key stakeholders, the folks who are sitting in the ministry, who are not fulfilling their duties in an effective manner. Your contractors kind of overcommitting. Like I said, they literally can't do the job. I saw some video where someone flew a drone over one of the sites that was supposed to be doing something for sea defense, and there was literally just a big patch of earth dug up and nothing done. And I think the contract, someone said to me, was it's like 800 million or something like this. And literally nothing is being done. But it's a competence issue and it's a capacity issue, and it's not going to be solved by a meeting. I mean, a meeting of that sort would be, to Timothy's point, a kind of public relations stunt to say, look, I care about these things too, but I think from a management standpoint, what you need to do is you need to understand who are the people who can get that job done, and let me get the people doing the job that needs to be done. And I think that was what was missed. The other thing I'll say is that, it's clear that this national procurement and tender board, one needs to say it. I think that there are some political dimensions, some political favoritism in that context, and I think when you favor, for political reasons, particular contractors, and you award contracts to individuals or to entities that lack the necessary capacity, then projects will be delayed. Right? There's no, you can't have one without the other. And I think what this speaks to is you've got to fundamentally reorient. And this is the conversation that should be happening between the president and his direct reports. We have to fundamentally reorient how we can't do business in this sort of nepotistic manner. Someone has got to have some oversight over the procurement and tender board to ensure that the people who get contracts or people who actually are able to deliver on these contracts, right? I would say that you also want to really take a look at the engineering class. I think I saw some part of this where the engineer was a member, was part of two companies that were sort of bidding on one of these projects, right? It's just clear. I mean, and I mean, I say this with respect. I mean, I'm sure that, President Ali must have been aware of these shortcomings in that process. So I while I certainly think there is a need for a meeting, that would not have been the meeting that I would have held. And I certainly think what that does is it's the same people who you need to complete the project. So, I'm probably one who's saying, calling them into the room and saying, what do I need to do to support you to get this project done? You've already started, you've already taken the money, you've already gone down the road. I can't take it back from you now. If I take it back from you now, then it's an 8-month delay rather than a 4-month delay. What resources do you need in order to get it done? That would have been perhaps my approach. But again, I think that, this meeting highlights sort of critical issues, but these critical issues are already well known. Anyone who's given someone 800 million and knows that they haven't done the job, these are well known. So it's a question now of actually getting the job done. And I would say that, the more effective thing would be to think through what are the structural reforms that will allow me to hold people accountable so that people are adhering to the established processes that we've put in place. So, I don't want to be a critic in that regard, but I'm just saying, if I had to do that, I would do it slightly differently.
Thank you. Timothy, you're up now. Shock and awe.
Well,
Shock and awe. More bark than bite.
Beginning.
Let me more bark than bite. What's going on here? What is going on here?
Terence's language is very restrained. So let me tell you how I think it is. Terence spoke about systems, and he gave his own experience in academia and in any administrative structure where you have a hierarchy. You have your CEO at the top, you have your board of directors, you have your senior managers, your junior managers, and the work trickles down so that when the work is done by the clerks, they are answerable to the junior managers, answerable to the senior managers, going all the way up to the CEO. It's obvious. So in Gaisuko, the CEO doesn't go into the field to cut cane. There are hundreds of cane cutters, or there were, who cut cane and answer to the overseer who answers up. Now, in the award of contracts, it's exactly the same. except that because of the technical nature of the work being done, there has to be a greater amount of oversight, and because of the money involved. So how it should happen is that at the bidding process, you ensure that a qualified person bids and that his bid is a reasonable sum of money. If you're talking about $500 million, you don't give him the whole $500 million at once. Normally, you will give a mobilization amount of 10%, and then as he does the work in pre-agreed stages, and it is certified to have been done correctly by the engineer who has designed the project, from the foundation to the materials, to the quantities, to the personnel. That engineer, when he certifies that this percentage of the work has been done, authorizes the payment of a portion of the contract sum. And then you use that portion to continue the work, stage by stage by stage, under the supervision of the government's engineer. That's how it must work. So you contract a professional who knows his job, and that professional does his job and is paid intermittently during the course of the contract, as certified by the government's engineer, who is independent and expert and is making sure the work is done properly. Sounds very simple. The Minister of Education doesn't know how to build a school. It's not her job. The Minister of Sports doesn't know how to build a gymnasium. That's not his job. So when the contract is awarded and the permanent secretary receives a report from the engineer to say we're over budget, or we're at this stage, or we're at that stage, and he reports it up, you can't blame the minister because a job is not done on time or because it's over budget. He doesn't know the first thing about construction. He can't build a bridge. Here's what happens in Guyana. And this is where I go back to Terrence's observation. When the contract is awarded, it's a family and friends thing. Let us say that clearly. So the contracts are not awarded to the most qualified or to the most experienced or to the contractor who shows he has the equipment to do the job, or the personnel, or he has the past experience doing similar jobs. In fact, you will hear stories that those pre-qualifying criteria are actually changed after the bid is invited. So that if I got machines and I'm the friend of the government, they will give that more importance and ignore the fact that I might not have employees or staff or expertise working for me. So qualifying criteria actually are changed. The next thing is this initial amount that you get, which traditionally is 10%, 20% to start you off. So if you get your equipment to the site and all of that, you hear stories of people getting 50 and 60% upfront. Now, if you've already received more than half, you don't have much motivation to do anything more after that. The reason you receive such a large upfront amount is because if you don't have the equipment and your family and friends, you use that money to buy the equipment theoretically so you could do the job. You also have to pay a kickback. So you have corruption in how the contract is awarded, and therefore you have awards made to people who are not qualified to do the job. The other aspect is this engineer who's supposed to monitor the thing. This is the government's engineer. He should be the government's employee. He should be there in a respected, dignified position because he's a qualified man and you trust in him to make sure the contractor is doing the work and supervise it. How on earth is the engineer going to say to this contractor, who he knows has an inside line to the government, you didn't do that properly, I'm not certifying this stage, you got to do it again? What's going to happen? Guy needs to pick up a phone very quickly and you get a phone call, certify that thing quickly. So it's his job. The other thing is that with gas and oil, those same engineers who receive very poor salaries in the government are quickly going into the gas and oil business. So those professionals are heading out, and therefore as a system, the ministries do not have enough engineers to monitor the dozens and hundreds of contracts that are being awarded. I'll tell you this. If you consider that the number of contracts awarded, let's say in the last 3 years, is 20 times the number of contracts awarded in any previous period of time. Is the government going to report that in order to accommodate that demand, they have now hired 20 times as many engineers in those ministries? Or do they have the same number of engineers, or maybe even less, struggling to keep up? Tasked with the impossible job of making bricks without straw, monitoring those hundreds of contracts, when they have not been given the numbers themselves to keep up. If you just look at that straight graph, the number of contracts awarded in the last 3 years versus the number of engineers employed and available in the government ministries to supervise those contracts, and think about what is the possibility of those engineers reviewing and certifying and ensuring that the jobs are done properly and monitoring it to make sure it's done in time, and bypassing those contractors who got an inside line to the minister and can make a phone call. They really have a difficult time. So you put all of those things together and you have chaos. You have a recipe for disaster. And it all comes back to the fact that corruption is rampant, and the corruption, once it starts, it can't stop. Because if you are feeding corruption, you got to come with tomorrow with more money. You got to come the next day with more money. You have to keep that up. So we then have what I alluded to earlier, which is a pure advertising gimmick. You have the president, who knows even less about construction than his ministers, who know even less than their permanent secretaries, who are supposed to receive reports from the engineers. And all of them in a room pretending they know about construction. A pure advertising gimmick designed to look like a strong man, to appeal to the emotion of the person who is watching. If I'm an engineer and I have the dignity of my job, and I have the security of my tenure and the knowledge that because of my qualification, I'm not your slave. I dare you to tell me I got to turn up 5:30 in the morning. Those days are finished. My grandfather had to do that when he went on the cane field to cut cane. You go 4-day morning. Were these people paid overtime? Were they told they had a choice 5:30 in the morning? Were they coming from Essequibo, Region 3, Region 6? And what kind of knowledge base do those questions and answers emanate from? The one thing I heard in that short clip was this statement: if those contracts aren't finished by the end of the year, I will terminate them. Nice strongman language.
Thank you.
In order to terminate any contract, surely there must be some kind of investigation as to the timelines, how far over you are. If you've received the notices to tell you you're in default, you better hurry. If maybe the government itself is in default in handing out certificates or in reviewing, or as they often do, in reconstructing the contract so that you have changes in the job you're supposed to do. They run into all kinds of problems, but you have this massive oversimplification by somebody who is not entitled to decide to terminate the contract. Not his decision to make, but it's a lovely strongman statement. So we go back to systems. The system is that if the engineer does not approve your work because it's not well done, he doesn't certify it. He's the only one who can do it. And if he doesn't certify it within the time frame that you're obligated to do it, then a procedure kicks in to terminate the contract, or more often, to impose penalties for the delay. None of that was discussed because all of that is boring, administrative, liberal gobbledygook. The strong man says, we're terminating the contracts. How dare you come to my 5:30 meeting late? All advertising. But it is a recognition of a larger problem, that the boat is going over the falls. We are reaching a stage where the corruption is so rampant and where the non-performance of the contracts is so obvious to everybody. Conversation Tree Road, Dennis Street, Lamaha Street, Thomas Lands, all of those projects so far over budget, so far over the timelines. Everyone is seeing it, that something has to be done. But that's only an admission of your own failure when you have that kind of meeting. It's nothing more, but it does resonate emotionally.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add, I mean, I think that's
my take, excuse me, Terence, my take on this is that I'm going to put you guys on the spot, and I think, Timothy, he made his position clear, advertising. I thought at first that the president was serious and not engaging in another sham. No. The system, the people who get contracts, the lament has been they are insiders. How do you discipline insiders? I think I heard some of that. How do you discipline insiders in this country where everybody knows everybody? The fruits of victory, of political victory, goes to my people. And those are my people primarily sitting in that room, whether a minister, permanent secretary, a contractor, and let's talk about contractors. They are the ones who are reaping those benefits and sometimes improperly because they are not eligible. So the thing starts from the procurement system. It continues in the procurement oversight, and it's not even a slap on the wrist. It's people going through the motions. So I'm a contractor, and I'm saying to myself, how long is he going to talk for? And this is not going anywhere because we have heard it before, and because it means nothing. So I think if I'm a contractor and I'm one that's wired, I have nothing to fear. I don't fear 31st of December. I don't fear 5:30 meetings. Shock and awe, more bark than bite, whatever it says. People have already arrived at their conclusion. But the man in the street sitting out there is saying, the president is on the move. The president is on the move, and the president is going to get results here. I am waiting to see how this shoe, 31st of December, 31st of January, 4 months overdue already, so that's another 2 months. That's 6. I'm adding another month, 7 months. How long are we going to continue with these things? And clearly, we are rushing ahead in so many areas. Capacity is not there, and we are paying a price for that now. Terence, your thoughts?
No, so that was the point. I think, far be it from me to give advice to the current leadership, but I think the point that you and Timothy both make is one that I wanted to make. So what that does is you see, the more times that President Ali has a meeting like this and nothing happens, what it does is it completely erodes even the trust of even those people who might be perceived as being on his side, because now it's saying, I'm losing faith in your ability to actually do this job. And I think be mindful of once that public disillusionment sets in. Because what it does, and I think this would be very, very dangerous for Guyana now. I already see some elements of this in some of the newspaper articles and so on. The public gets skeptical, and then you can't convince anyone of anything anymore. And I think if I were advising President Ali, I would say the less of those meetings you have, it's better, because what you're doing is you're putting your personal credibility at risk. Because if you come today and you say, like in this note, you've essentially said, 4 months from now, if this thing is not done, I am going to take this contract away from you. Well, as Timothy just outlined, there will be some process for taking the contract away. And it might be that in many cases, the people who you imagined that you should be able to take the contract away from, legally, you can't do that. And so then you're left with your promises in a critical matter not being able to affect them in some substantive way. So I think I would be, the largest problem I see, maybe it's already eroded, but I don't know that. I think that having those kinds of public meetings where you berate, people who are your not direct reports, really ultimately puts your credibility as a national leader at risk. And once people become skeptical, it's hard to go in the opposite direction. And I think, you know, this is the kind of thing that, you know, sometimes folks don't fully appreciate. This kind of thing can further exacerbate the sort of polarization that is, you know, part of the society, and then more substantively, it stunts the national growth. I mean, you know, if the people are supposed to do something, if they're supposed to build a road and it's built sloppily, then you've wasted the money and you haven't done what you're supposed to do. So, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, that folks can begin to see. We started off the conversation with India and Modi and some of the things that see there. I think there is a value in competence. There is a value in doing it the right way. There is a value in not having the procurement process be rife with nepotism. There is a value to that, and it is a value that supports, you know, counterintuitively, it's one that might support the leadership and its constituents, and in the absence, it might be the thing that causes the leadership to loosen its grip on leadership. Because I think, you know, it's clear. I've seen many organizations where the leader stands up and loudly says things that don't get done, and the more that happens, you know, people stop listening, and when they stop listening, it goes in the wrong direction. So, you know, I'm not an advisor of any sort, but I would say that those meetings are less productive than they seem, even with the theater that Timothy described. You know.
Thank you, Terence. I think we're going to have to move off from this, but I want to leave this here with our viewers and with you two gentlemen. The president has a fondness for a muscular approach to certain things, certain circumstances, and often that comes back to haunt him. That muscling his way always most times has come back to floor him. I mean, he's the president, and you really don't want to say these things, but I think sometimes his cronyism, favoritism, nepotism is the nature of the system, and I am struggling with how do you discipline that? How do you rearrange that, change that? To your point, gentlemen, especially you, Timothy, the legal aspect, the legal procedures to combat that, I think could be countered by the fear and the reality that if I take the government to court for wrongful termination or improper termination, then that's the end of me as a contractor. I got to sell bread or something else. I think that might be a prevailing factor there, and the president might be counting on that.
Let me just answer before you go on. I understand you do need to move on, GHK, but Terence raised a good point that it becomes counterintuitive if you got to do this more than once, and you begin to lose the power of that delivery, and you begin to look more and more thin. You begin to look more and more impotent. And I want to point out that 6 or 8 months ago, it might have been a year, the government read the riot act to the GPL folk and said that this performance is unacceptable and we cannot be having blackouts and you have to fix this problem. Well, we still get them blackout in town. Nothing has changed. They brought in a ship with some generation and that kind of thing, but it's the same problems because it's the same cronyism. Again, 8 months ago, riot act was read to the Gaisuko folk. Management at Gaisuko, you're not doing your job. We've had enough. We're going to have to take stern action, blah, blah, blah. Gaisuko's production this year has been the worst ever. The worst ever. So we do have concrete examples of the hypotheticals that you are giving, Terence. But I don't agree with your conclusion, I'm afraid. That yes, people are skeptical. People see that and they're skeptical. But you know what? The believers want to believe so desperately that they will believe each time all over again. And even as they get more skeptical, they will still have the answer to you to say, they're doing a better job than your people. They're doing a better job than the other folk. And that is our tragedy in this country, that we don't judge on the merit, we judge on the demerit of those other people. And that always allows us to have belief. Now, going back to your point, GHK, about what's the solution. I love the example you gave because I'm aware of specific incidents where that example plays out, where a contract is bypassed. He puts in his bid, he wins, and then he's told that they changed the pre-qualifying factors and he's lost. So his win turns into a loss. He's now the second or the third, and it's given to somebody else. And on each occasion, the intelligent contractor will do nothing, because if he protests, he doesn't get another contract. He does not get another contract. Now, that in itself tells you that there is serious interference with the process of awarding the contracts. Because whether you like me or not, if I pre-qualify and mine is the best bid, I must get it. So there's no doubt about interference with the process. There is a solution, but the solution can only come through legislature. You see, as long as it's only your boys inviting the bids, assessing the bids, and deciding how to do it in the procurement rooms, those little secret rooms, then you win. But if a majority opposition in Parliament changes that legislation to mandate that all those procurement bodies have majority opposition on it, suddenly both cats watching the milk, and it's much more difficult for us in our little camaraderie room to break those rules, because those boys that we hate are now looking over our shoulder. They're just as corrupt as us, but at least now there's an equal balance field, an equal playing field of corruption. And the second solution, because as you say, you go against the government, you never get another contract. Decentralize it from the government. So have a budget passed by Parliament where each of the NDCs and the RDCs are looking after their own roads. So the Linden Council can award their own contracts for the roads in their place. What that will do is that it'll allow me, a contractor, if I feel aggrieved by the central government treatment of me, to suck my teeth and say, I'm not going no 5:30 in the morning meeting. I'll go and I'll bid at Linden, I'll bid at Mahdia, I'll bid in regions 1 and 2. So you decentralize by allowing each of the RDCs and the NDCs autonomy, financial autonomy, by legislation, which they have already, it's just not implemented because of government central control, and let them award contracts. So you now have a wider scope, but each of them is awarding fewer contracts. It's not one government awarding 600 contracts. It's now 20 or 30 bodies, each awarding 20 or 30 contracts, so that the oversight is so much more manageable. The transparency is so much more manageable. And that's the second solution that I'll propose to you. So I think there are solutions.
And you also have the escalation to big government, should the regional level be found to be unfavorable. Gentlemen, thank you for that.
Yes.
And we are ready to move now to the third and final topic that has been saturating the airwaves in Guyana, at least some of it. Referendum, oil and gas, referendum before elections, logistics, referendum after elections, referendum, validity of it, and Exxon's reaction to it, should the Guyanese people vote affirmatively. Yeah, let's have one. We are disgusted with this contract, and so on and so forth. We'll start with you, Terence. Your thoughts here. Referendum, yay or nay, and efficacy.
Well,
And when?
So I think this requires a number of different perspectives. So I do think that the Guyanese people, being the sovereign of Guyana, have a right to really think about whether or not their democracy, I think there needs, they have a right to ask for a referendum. One, I think if you were to do a referendum, I think you should not do this within the context of an election. I think the referendum should be done as a single item, because this is an extremely big decision for Guyana to raise, right? I mean, but I also think, and this is where, you know, the distance, people have to be mindful of what it is that they're aiming at doing. Right? So this referendum will be, in a sense, you know, like it or not, the Exxon contract is the foundation for the the Exxon contract is the reason that Modi is in Guyana. Like it or not, Modi is there because of Exxon and the oil and gas that's being drilled. Okay, so we have to be ready to that any move to revisit these terms through a public vote will have will reverberate with the investment community, and it can potentially have an effect on the energy sector in Guyana and more broadly the entire Guyanese business ecosystem. I think that's the balance. Those are the two things that are on the side of the equation. I read in a I think in the Trinidadian newspaper, the Alistair Routledge talking, you know, not favorably about the question of the referendum, and that is their position. I don't think that they're going to run from that position, right? They, you know, when you read the statements of the folks in the oil and gas, they call Guyana an advantaged asset, i.e., it's easier to do business and you get more profit from doing business in Guyana. They've decided to bet their money on the advantage asset. A referendum changes how advantaged that asset is to the larger group. And so I think we should go wide open. It's clear to me that Guyanese should seriously revisit some of the questions of the agreement. How they revisit those questions is open for Guyanese to decide. And I think, but they should walk into that with eyes wide open. There are two things happening here. One side, you have, you know, as the story says, the goose that laid the golden egg. Modi is there because of the Exxon contract. And so we have to be mindful of both of these sides of the equation. So our democracy is sovereign and it's our country and we should decide what happens in that country. And the people's will should be respected. And I think if you do it, you shouldn't do it after an election. You should do it before an election so that it does not fall into the sort of contestation that comes with a national election. It should fall into a contestation as Guyanese. Do we think that this is the right decision for us to make? But we should make, and I would argue from a distance, Guyanese should make that decision with their eyes wide open. There are going to be reverberations, like it or not, and you're dealing with powerful forces, and so, you know, I wait with bated breath the final decision on this, but it certainly is a big call.
Thank you, Terence.
Yeah.
Timothy, we know where Exxon stands. I think I've heard before you about where you stand in terms of renegotiation. But now we have this referendum issue. Take it out of the hands of the politicians and put it in the hands of the people, the sovereign people, as Terence. Where do you stand here? And tell us where you are.
All right, GHK. Advantaged asset, lovely expression.
And that's what it says in the document, right? That Guyana is an advantage.
What that means is that we got a good deal in Guyana. That's what it means. We got a good deal in Guyana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now let's go with that starting point. Our leaders negotiated with Exxon and signed an agreement. Now they're vexed. All right. Can you retract your agreement. Legally, no, not unless the other side agree. So the expression renegotiation presupposes that Exxon agrees, because if Exxon says go to hell, then either you breach the agreement or you stick with the agreement. Because one party to a contract can't all by himself change the terms of the contract. It doesn't work like that. You've signed up, you've shaken hands, and you have your agreement. Both sides are now bound. Let me tell you, I've been practicing law nearly 30 years, commercial law. I've even advised SO back in the day. I am not qualified to advise on whether we have a good deal or a bad deal. And I am not qualified to suggest what terms of the contract should be reviewed and what new numbers should be inserted. So if we're getting 1%, I'm sorry, if we're getting 1%, I personally am not qualified to say we should be getting 2% or 3% or 5%. Now, for me, this is why this is important. I'm speaking as a commercial lawyer with many years' experience, and I don't know. And I wonder, sorry, I just ate something and it went wrong. I wonder about how sensible it is, therefore, to put that decision in the hands of everybody. Experts have to make decisions on the areas of their expertise. I don't believe there's anybody in Guyana or any Guyanese who's expert enough to go to renegotiate that contract. So the question isn't just a simplification, do we renegotiate and do we have a referendum? I would challenge anybody who wants to go and vote at that referendum to say, what clause do you want to change and how do you want to change it? Because if you are assuming a competence to say, let us renegotiate, it must be premised on some knowledge of what change you want to make. If you don't know that you want to change clause 3 from 4% to 8%, then you are not qualified to make a decision on whether or not to renegotiate. And that referendum is a way to abdicate responsibility from the people who should be shouldering that responsibility and say, give it to the people. It's not politically wise to say it, but the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker are not qualified to go and look at that contract and say what they want to change. And a simplistic referendum to say yes change or no change doesn't help you, doesn't move you forward, because nobody knows what changes you want to make. The other thing that's laughable is I haven't heard of a referendum in Guyana for many years. How do you do a referendum? All these nice sounding things, the Venezuelans did it the other day, so we're going to do one too. But how do you do a referendum? I'm no expert on the subject, but does GCOM do it? GCOM is the only entity that has a list of people who could turn up to vote at a referendum, but that's not GCOM's mandate. On my very quick reading, and I may be wrong, the referendum was a procedure that was available under the Constitution which existed before the 1980 Constitution. And I don't see that it exists now. I may be wrong. It's not my area. It's not my area of strength. But that is for constitutional change. To ask the people to decide something, I don't know how they'll go about that. And given our level of competence at that level, I fear to think, I tremble to think how it will be implemented. But I'd like to give you one comparison. A first world country with a population with a higher standard of education than ours, England, voted on a referendum whether or not to leave Brexit, the European economy. And all of those bright, educated, knowledgeable people. It's funny about something. If you're bright in one area, if you got a degree in history, you're an expert in chemistry and engineering and everything. But all of those people voted to leave. And all of them regretting it now because they were not competent they were not competent, each of them, to look at the economic and social ramifications of leaving Europe. And it should not have been put to them in the first place.
No, okay.
Are you done? Are you finished, Timothy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Terrence, we got a couple of minutes here. You wanted to say something?
No, I was going along the lines. I mean, I think that I just reflected on the Aubrey Norton 20-point hydrocarbon plan, right? And I read that, and one of the so the language of renegotiation is not the language that it uses, right? It uses the language review, and I think it goes to the point that Timothy just raised, which is that the production sharing agreement essentially gives the oil company some veto power over any contract modifications, right? And so it's the reason that I think VP Jaglio's has a very measured approach to these questions of whether or not we're going to have this a referendum in this regard. And really, though, I think the big thing is really it's a question of like direct democratic participation in something that people are feeling, the kind of questions that we've had earlier around the contracts and so on. People are feeling that I'm not participating in this thing. And one way in which folks are responding to the fact that I'm not participating is to say the contract is a bad contract, and if we had more money from the contract, then there would be more money for you. But I have my doubts about it. I mean, I'm thinking if you do what the money you have now well, you might give me some confidence that having more money will be more effectively distributed. But I say all that to say is that we have on one side, we have a kind of a reasonable expectation of democratic participation in decision making for the society. On the other side, we have a very serious question about the economic benefits that are currently accruing to the society as a result of this investment on the part of ExxonMobil. And I think that, again, counterintuitively, I think that there's a little opportunity here, right? There's a little opportunity here to really think through, how we can do this thing in a sophisticated way where we kind of figure out how to not have to make this choice today. Say, I don't think, say if I'm an advisor, I'm giving advice to, a man comes to me and says, I have $55 billion and I want to spend it in Guyana. I don't have any money to start with. I have to seriously think about, how am I balancing the $55 million with, doing something that potentially could have the man take the 25 that he already put and go away. Not that I don't think I don't think in this moment that there's anyone going anywhere from the Stabroek block at this moment. But I think it can sour the waters, and I think we have to be prepared for it fundamentally disrupting the ecosystem. And so I would, I think how we handle this issue will set the tone for going forward. And I think the key is in kind of finding some mechanism that is saying, look, the people have a right, as they do in a democracy. And I think I don't want to squelch that. As they do in a democracy, they have a right to say something. It's their country. It's ultimately, they will have to deal with decommissioning all the things in the Atlantic Ocean. When Exxon is done and gone, it will be Guyanese who have to deal. So they have a right to say something about this. Now, balancing that right.
Terrence, excuse me. I'm gonna have to slow you down here. We've got about a minute left.
Okay, so that would be my point. Balancing this right with the other side of the equation is the challenge I think that sits there for Guyana, and Guyanese will have to make that decision.
Thank you. I think the level of skepticism, the level of cynicism in this country is so high with politicians that that a referendum appears to be this panacea that takes it out of the hands of the politicians and puts it in the hands of the people. Logistically, And timing-wise, especially we've got an elections, I would say within a matter of months, and certainly within the next 12 months. How does that impact? And is it GCOM? Is it a question, a line item? Is it as simple as yes or no? Is it a separate? Because there's a call also for it before, because the sense is after elections, nobody wants to talk about it anymore. So give the power to the people. But having said that now, and then we've got a Republican administration in the White House, set to go into the White House. Let's not forget that. We've had a former Exxon CEO being Secretary of State, Mr. Tillerson, all of those factors. And so we were to push there with this, as viable as that may be economically, we think for us, it's something that we really need to ponder very, very carefully. Gentlemen, I thank you for your thoughts here shared very frankly, Modi and the President's meeting and now the referendum. We thank you, our viewers and listeners, for being here. And we thank Mr. Nohar Singh and his group for making this program possible. Mr. Devin Bassoon for doing a wonderful job at the controls. To everybody, everywhere, have a happy Thanksgiving. Because I may not be back for Christmas, have a good Christmas and a wonderful New Year. All the best. Thank you, gentlemen.
All the best.
Good
Thank
evening,
you,
everyone.
and have a wonderful evening.